If you're listening on the podcast, thank you very much. Make sure you subscribe, give me a good rating if you enjoy the show. But I'm also going to break this up into a couple different parts for the YouTube channel. So if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and hit the notification bell. It really does help. 25 years later, God, this hurts so bad. I'm so fucking old. 25 years after the original Woodsboro murders, Ghostface returns yet again to repeat history yet again. And I was expecting just a straightforward, and again, I keep referencing 2018, but that's because to me, that's I keep comparing it to that because I'm a huge Halloween fan, and Halloween 2018 didn't check a lot of boxes for me. But Halloween 2018, they basically took the idea of this guy killed someone 30, 40 years ago, and now he's back and doing the same thing, and blah, blah, blah. They didn't just follow that route. They did, but it was purposeful, and they used the context of a requel or a reboot in the story as, potential motive to work their way around that a little bit, and it made sense. So, at this point on paper, yes, it sounds repetitive. I just alluded to that. But with Scream 4 and 5, the franchise is starting to remind me of the heyday of Friday the 13th. I know I've referenced Halloween a lot, but it really is starting to remind me of the heyday of Friday the 13th in this specific way. You had Halloween. With Halloween 2, it was a bit of a departure, but still along the same lines. They tried to go the anthology route completely out of left field with Halloween 3. Then they came back to 4, and then they went with The Curse, and then they rebooted, and it was a mess. Friday the 13th knew what they had. They knew what the attraction was, and they did it. They knew what the fuck they were. I'll repeat that again. They knew what the fuck they were. Scream knows what the fuck it is at this point. And they're taking that framework. There is a basic framework. And they're taking that, and instead of being repetitive, they're setting you up. It's like bowling. When you go bowling, you have to set up the pins. You set them up in the same spots every time. When you rack billiards, pool, unless you're playing 9-ball or something else, if you're playing just straight billiards, you put it in the same position. You're going to hit it from different angles, but you're putting the balls in the same position. Why am I talking about balls? Anyway, it's late. This, to me, is along the same lines. Where Friday the 13th, you had these people in a faraway place, away from authority, carefree, everything's great, la-di-da-di-da, maniac killer. Next time, kids in a faraway place, la-di-da-di-da, maniac killer ruins the party, shits in the punch bowl. Friday the 13th, part 3. Kids far away at a cabin, la-di-da-di-da-di-da, everything's great, maniac killer. This extended all the way to part 7. Even though they did an imitation in part 5, all the way to part 7, it was the same thing. And people kept coming back. Now, eventually it wore off. They had to go in a different direction, which ironically was New York City, which is where, well, I should say Vancouver. Jason Takes Vancouver. For a while I've been calling Scream 6 Ghostface Takes Vancouver, but moving into a different realm. We'll see where it goes from here. But I felt like by episode 5, Scream just knew what the fuck it was. They have a framework. They have a similar premise. They have new characters. They have new rules to follow or break as called for. Not new rules, existing rules, I should say, to follow or break as called for. And they do it to tell the story. It seems like they change just enough between each installment to make it feel different, to keep things interesting, to keep it fresh, but they still stay true to the spirit of Scream. And, the film starts with the crank call. We're introduced to the new kids on the block. Finale takes place at a house party. We know the score by now. We know what's going to happen in we can follow along with it. And there was a cool moment. There was a meta moment, which I'm not a huge fan necessarily of meta. But you had like the niece of, I'm trying to remember the guy's name. I can never remember. It's Jamie Kennedy's character, the horror nerd from the first one. She's laying on the couch watching Stab in the same position as the scene is playing out and the killer comes in from the background. It's very cool. And to know that in the first Scream, it was originally like that. But since they have the movies and the scope and the context of this, the Stab movies, it was cool to be able to do that, because you can't do that with Friday the 13th. You can't have someone sitting like Teddy in Part 4 watching the original Halloween or Friday the 13th. I'm looking at the mask. I apologize. I've done it several times. I keep calling everything Halloween because I got to look away from the mask when I talk. But in this case, I lost my place. In this case, I lost my place. We know the framework. We know the basic beats by now. And they keep changing enough and maneuvering enough to keep us guessing and to keep it fresh. In fact, during the house party, I remember where I was going with that. During the final party, the scenery looked familiar. And when they were in the kitchen, I saw like the windows, and they were out in the living room. I saw the couch. I'm like, are they trying to make it look like the finale from the original Scream? And then everything plays out and you find out it is the house from the finale, which I thought was a nice touch. I'm not going to belabor the point because I talked about it in Part 4, but they sprinkle in legacy characters. They take some left turns. It's a new recipe. You're folding these ingredients in, and it's all familiar, but you're giving a new take on it. If you're making crepes, you can make different kinds with different ingredients. It's still crepes, but there's a variety, right? And I think starting off with Dewey and Gale, spoiler, divorced, was a nice little right turn, because it raised the stakes for the characters. It caused a little bit more tension, a little bit more drama. It wasn't the same as the last movie where they come back and they're kind of working together and they're at odds. It's she's in New York or wherever she is as an anchor, which maybe I just figured out how they get there, but probably not. But Dewey's not the sheriff. They asked him to retire. He has baggage. He's injured. He's not like Dewey was never fucking insert action hero here. It was never Schwarzenegger, but he's still not who he used to be. He's a shell of his former self. He's fallen on hard times. He left Gale from where they were at in New York and came back home and realized I was meant to be here and you weren't. That's a really painful line for the movie. When you stand there and they have this meeting and they come back together, and he just realizes, like, I love you so much, but I'm not meant to be there, and you're not meant to be here. And he has to he has the wherewithal to realize the truth of the situation, that he just had to let her go. Then that, again, raises the stakes later on. Spoiler alert. When Dewey is dispatched. Not only do they have that between him and Gale, and now there's regret, and now it's like, what the fuck if you would have just stayed here, or if I would have been with you and I could have helped you. There's so much wrapped into it, as opposed to just, hey, it's cannon fodder. They really did a great job with that character, and I was surprised with the little, it's not a huge resurgence, he's not Brendan Fraser, but the little resurgence that he's had in recent years with, redeeming himself in wrestling and doing other movies and trying to clean up his life. Like, I was surprised that they dispatched him like that, but he went out a hero. Also raised the stakes. The stakes were also raised by him being on hard times, because not only was there that depth with him and Gale in their story that they alluded to, and it's gut wrenching. If you've ever been in a relationship, sometimes you really love someone, but you've got to let them go because it's just not going to work out for whatever reason. Not only that, but Dewey has fallen on hard times, and he's trying to redeem himself. I get the feeling that he's kind of a joke, or that he's an afterthought, or that he's washed up. And it's like, yeah, like if Sheriff Brody from Jaws, if you go back to Jaws 2, and he was ridiculed and he had to leave and he was a drunk, and like, I like the flawed heroes. I love that concept. The flawed heroes. And I think having him go out in a blaze of glory did offer his character some redemption. We didn't get to see the fall from grace. It happened in between installments. But again, kept it fresh. It kept it from being the same thing. Again, like Scream 4, like I alluded to in the wraparound Scream apology video, it brings legacy characters back with purpose, to be involved, and to pass the torch to the next generation. Excuse me. You have Sydney come back. You have Gale Weathers come back. But they're not coming back in the same way they came back in part 4, where they're still in some ways the heroes of the movie. They are, but there are other heroes in this movie. And by the end of the film, all of these female heroes, these survivors, these final girls, right? They're all bound together by their experiences. And it wasn't like a girl power moment like in Avengers Endgame, where they took all of the female heroes and they had this little cute lineup like, we're girl power. It was what it was. And if people like that sort of thing, that's fine. I'm not going to knock you. But this was done in a much more organic way where they're going through this. They've gone through their own experiences. Now they're going through this together. And they come through it on the other side in some cases. And it's like, hey, they're bonded by this. Not only are they both survivors, like Jill and Sydney were survivors in some way, but that was the only connection. These four women are surviving together. So again, it's a way to use these characters with purpose and to bring them in to bring them in, not in a deliberate manner of like, oh, hey, here's Sydney and she's final girl now. It all came through, and you never knew who was going to survive to the end and who wasn't. So their grief, their trauma, their experiences, not only can they relate to each other, but they're also going through it together. I think Scream 5 also built upon, since I'm talking about things that 5 built upon from 4, the concept of expanding the family lines to extend the universe. In the Scream 4 portion of this, I mentioned family is usually a deus ex machina and a very deliberate way to just extend the story because someone's not available. We'll see what happens in Scream 6 with Neve Campbell not being on board. But each character or suspect in this movie, if you don't know, is related to another character from a previous installment. Again, this is deliberate, not in a deliberate fashion to shoehorn people into a story to keep things going. Deliberate in a sense of, we're all related to these people. We've all got skin in the game. We all have ties to this. Again, no one is above suspicion. And I think it was done really well. It's not like the cheap out they took with Scream 2, where, oh my God, there's a killer. Who is it? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, hi, I'm reporter lady, and I just so happen to be Billy's mom, you bitch. I'll kill you. Ah! Like, I love Jackie from Roseanne. I'm trying to remember her name. But like, it reminds me, if you've ever seen the movie Grown Ups, and you have the guy who's at the campfire, and he's telling a spooky story. It's John, the handyman. Remember from the beginning of the story, I mentioned him really quick up front at first, and we never heard from him? Like, it feels like that a lot, and that's a trope. Instead, they brought everyone together and came out with it and said, look, we're all related. We all go to Woodsboro. We're all related in some way to these people. It could be any of us. And also, there's a movie nerd, and there's a this, and there's a that. And it's not like you're the new Loomis either. Like, the movie nerd is related, and the mom even says, oh God, he would be so proud you guys are having this meeting. Like, there's some funny shit, and they play with it. It's not just like, okay, who can we fill this slot with? And speaking of building on the past, relations to the other characters, I am going to spoil something here, so if you haven't seen it, go see the movie. But homage names in movies usually make me wince. I've been trying not to say cringe lately because that's become a buzzword that's way overused. But they usually make me wince. The surprise reveal of the main character is Sam Loomis. I did get a tickle out of that. It's a callback to Psycho, obviously, with Sam Loomis, and of course, fucking Dr. Loomis from Halloween. So I did kind of like that. There's something like, I'm Samantha Carpenter, and it's like, I'm Betty Craven. There's even a guy named Wes, which is cool. But like, it didn't. Usually, it kind of makes me cringe. I said it again. It usually makes me cringe, but in this case, I thought it was kind of cool. And it did have its campy and comedic moments, Scream 5. But it's much more serious than even Scream 4 was. There were some scenes, okay? Yes. God, now I sound like Bill Maher. This movie is okay, but there were some points during like the finale where it's really serious, and I think one of the guys was like, "Stop fucking up my movie or my ending," or something like that. And I was like, "Oh, really?" Just kind of dampens the mood a little bit. But overall, Scream 5 was, and I'm trying not to, I don't want to be too specific, and I don't want to be too vague here, which is why I'm not giving too many plot details, but like, this movie was much more serious and much more tense, I should say. It was much more true to the legacy of slasher movies than Scream, in the way that it was more serious and let some of the camp go. I think they have to do that because you can't keep beating up on the franchise, and they're getting more serious as they go. And they're also competing with more serious movies. Terrifier 2 just came out, and it's going to get another installment. There's probably going to be another Halloween movie. There's a new Friday the 13th movie coming out. Leatherface was pretty goddamn good. Leatherface, I should say. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was pretty good, even though some people panned it. So I think they have to compete with some of the more serious movies, and you can only get by for so long being comedic and poking fun at yourself. And I think, honestly, I've always felt like if you can't take your own movie seriously, I'm not going to. So I don't know. Maybe there's some of that in there. Maybe I'm just reading into it. But, they delve into some of these more serious themes as well. Like, running away is a big one. Running away or facing this problem, whatever the problem is. Gale and Dewey, I mentioned. Dewey ran away. He couldn't handle it in the big city, and God bless you. I love you, but do your thing. I'm meant to be a small town guy. Sam and her sister Tara. Sam left her sister behind, and now she comes back, and she comes back to be with her and to, I got a belly full of white dog shit, and you lay this on me. I don't know. I thought of that during the scene where Sam comes back and tells her sister that she's the bastard child of Billy Loomis, and she never knew, and she had to leave because she thought she was going to be a serial killer. I just kept thinking of that scene from when Tara, and I love, what's her name, Jenna Ortega. I love that kid. She's great. But when she said that line, like, all this shit happens and now you want to come back and lay this shit on me, I just kept thinking of Will Ferrell and Step Brothers. Like, oh man. But no, they explore these themes of facing your fears or running away. I mean, not to be funny, but like, Sydney in the movie is literally running. She's jogging when Dewey calls her and tells her about the new murders, and it says, "Just stay away, please." And she's like, "Yeah, I'm not coming back." But the scene starts with her running. She's running with a stroller, and like, so running away from your problems and facing them is a huge, huge thing. And the funny thing, and they mention this specifically in the movie, so this is not unique insight here, but one of the characters actually says, like, "What are we going to do?" And he says, "We're going to do what everyone in these movies should do and no one ever does. We're getting the fuck out. We're leaving this town. We're gone. Fuck them. We're out." And that plays into something later in the movie. But it's like that whole concept of running or staying and facing your fear versus shying away from it, also reminiscent to A Nightmare on Elm Street, which was another Wes Craven film. The key to Nancy defeating Freddy Krueger was, I'm not going to be afraid of you. She did turn away, so she technically did run away from him in a sense. But by turning her back, she was facing her fear. I'm not going to be afraid of you. I'm not going to give you any more energy. So I thought that was an interesting little thing that I just thought of a few minutes ago. I wanted to mention that, even though I don't know if it quite relates, but again, just in the vein of these classic movies, and it just keeps on building. And they also incorporate, speaking of building, they build into this, again, new generation. Last movie was about The Price of Fame. This movie, they incorporate the YouTube critic era, the podcast era, the streamer era, right? You know, even the fucking Dead Meat crew had a cameo. Kudos to them. I wish I could get to that point. That'd be amazing. But, you know, it really brings into the fold of this recipe obsessive internet fans, critics, bloggers, streamers, podcasters. And look, everyone's got an opinion. They're not always great. People may think my opinions suck. Don't watch the channel. I'm thankful that a lot of you do stick around and you like the content. I appreciate it. But there is really this underbelly of shitty opinions online. And there's maniac fans. One of the things I thought, the Halloween 25th anniversary, was it 25 Years of Terror, the documentary that they made? One of the things I noticed is there's a lot of creepy people that show up at these things. And Jamie Lee Curtis, when she came back to do the appearances, the look on her face sometimes was like, "Oh, okay, hi, nice to meet you." Like some of the shit they would say and do, it's like, ooh, a little bit uncomfortable. And let's face it, there's a lot of crazy hardcore fans that they want what they want, and if they don't get it, they're vocal about it. Played into that perfectly. I mean, and I can tell you, I spent a lot of times lurking on message boards back in the day, talking to other fans, and like you could put together the most logical explanation for your opinion, and no matter what you say, it's like, oh, that's bullshit. That sucks because of this. And it's, okay, yes, you know, Jimmy, you like X, Y, and Z, and that's all you like. So just, of course, don't acknowledge anything I just said. It's really a weird scene in some ways. There's a lot of great people, some I still talk to this day, a handful. But backing away from that, they really use that to underpin the story. And again, I'm going to spoil this. I'm not going to give all the details of the movie, but, you know, obsessed fans taking things into their own hands. We haven't seen this yet in real life, and I hope we don't. But the idea of, it wasn't just, I think lesser films would have just made fun of these people and written them off. This showcases just that unhinged aspect of some people that are obsessive and took it one step further and incorporated them into the story. So taking this outrage to the extreme. This one's not about family spite, although in some ways you have that. It's not about a jilted lover per se, although you may have that. At its core, it's about obsessed, crazy fans saying, these sequels suck, they're not what we want, these reboots are trash, it's nothing to do with the originals, what made them great, the legacy in the first place. We are going to take it into our own hands, and we are going to make it happen. And we are going to cause a resurgence in this franchise and bring it back to greatness because we are right and what we think is right works. It was brilliant to do. Brilliant to do. And I don't always like that. I'm not a huge fan necessarily of you know, taking that and brushing those people, you know, paintbrushing those types of people, right? Because that's your bread and butter. Star Wars tended to do that by a lot of the cast and crew coming out and thumbing their noses at the hardcore fans that weren't happy. Look, there was 3 questionable movies made. It wasn't all unhinged people. So using that here and not just making fun of them or not just subvert, like Rian Johnson, not just subverting all these expectations and taking turns away from the franchise. Instead, using this to build the franchise, to me, was a genius move. So whoever had that idea, you deserve a fucking gold star, my friend. The little sticky ones that they used to give you in elementary school when you got good grades, I guess. But, you know, they always play with the idea of a requel or a sequel. And I think that's the meta that I'm comfortable with. Instead of making fun of what's come before you, understanding the era that you exist in, calling it out, using that to kind of gift wrap your film in. I don't mind that as much. And to me, it was, it was classic Scream meta, but it was also a creative motive in a somewhat repetitive story to keep things fresh, to take it in a different direction, to give it a new flavor. So, and again, I'll part with this because I'm running short on time here. But another thing that I'll leave you with that I thought was really interesting was they introduced the concept of an unreliable narrator into this franchise. We follow Sam. She's obviously taking medication, and I think she said antipsychotics. She's seeing visions. She's afraid of what she may turn into. And there's issues between her and her sister, Tara, who is the initial target in this movie. I wasn't all convinced that she wasn't behind some of this, that she wasn't orchestrating some of this. Now, she wasn't in town when it first happened, but we know, and obviously this movie alludes to this, you don't have to be because there's always multiple killers. I was not convinced it was her, but it kept me guessing. Again, just all these new tropes. I'm not going to go back into it. You can watch my wraparound, my Scream apology video for a deeper dive on that. But I think taking these tropes, introducing these concepts and these ideas, and using them to misdirect and misguide and keep you guessing is a smart choice in a fourth and a fifth installment in films that have been using a similar structure for almost 30 years now. So I thought it was really nice to introduce that just as another way to differentiate Scream 5 from the rest. So again, is this film without fault? Absolutely not. Plenty of campy lines. I mentioned the corny comedy or dialogue in the middle of tense scenes that dampen the temperature of the room a little bit. There's some characters also in this that completely disappear for huge chunks of the movie. There was people in Scream 4 and Scream 5 that seemed to disappear and be non-existent for almost like the whole second act into the third act. Maybe deliberate. Maybe you just don't have enough screen time for everybody. Screen time for everybody. Scream Time would be a decent podcast name for anybody out there who wants to do a Scream fan podcast. But, again, is it without its flaws? Absolutely not. Is it a perfect movie? No. I thought it was really goddamn good, and I enjoyed it a lot more than some of the recent reboots that we've seen in the past couple of years, which is saying a lot, seeing as I have the shade painted on my wall, thanks to my talented wife. So, if you've not seen these movies, if you've slept on them, if you're thinking about skipping Scream 6 because you're not a fan of this franchise, I would suggest watch Part 1, Part 4, Part 5, and go see Part 6 because I'm hearing mixed things about Part 6, but I'm also hearing it's really, really good from people I trust. So I'm out of time. My name's bshowbrian. Thank you for checking out the channel. Like, subscribe. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys next time.